counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all the persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. This Honourable House now resume its sittings. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter, Mr. Samura, Mr. Holness, Mr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malawford, Mr. Green, Mr. Terry Long, Mr. Main, Mr. R. Scott, Mr. Azan, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown Burke, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Charles, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Miss Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Miss Daly, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Miss Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kelly, Dr. McNeil, Miss Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redman, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mrs. Vaz, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very brief statement, which is just to read into the records of Parliament for public information the orders that have been made under the Disaster Risk Management Enforcement, the Disaster Risk Management Act, the Disaster Risk Management Enforcement Measures Order 2020. Whereas the Minister responsible for disaster preparedness and emergency management has given written notice Whereas the Prime Minister responsible for disaster preparedness and emergency management has given written notice to the Prime Minister that Jamaica appears to be threatened with or affected by the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19, and that measures apart from or in addition to those specifically provided for in the Disaster Risk Management Act should be taken promptly. Now, therefore, in exercise of powers conferred upon the Prime Minister by Section 26(2) of the Disaster Risk Management Act, the following order is hereby made. 1. This order may be cited as the Disaster Risk Management Declaration of Disaster Area Order 2020, and 2. The whole of Jamaica is hereby declared to be a disaster area. And this was the order that created the overall framework for subsequent orders to be given. Whereas the Minister responsible for disaster preparedness and emergency management has given written notice to the Prime Minister that Jamaica appears to be threatened with or affected by the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19, and that measures apart from or in addition to those specifically provided for in the Disaster Risk Management Act should be taken promptly. And whereas on the 13th day of March 2020, the Prime Minister, by order, declared the whole of Jamaica to be a disaster area. Now, therefore, in exercise of the powers conferred upon the Prime Minister by Section 26(2) of the Disaster Risk Management Act, the following order is hereby made. Order number one, this order may be cited as a Disaster Risk Management Enforcement Measures Order 2020, and 2, with effect from the 18th day of March 2020. The measures set out in paragraphs 3 to 7 are directed to be enforced for removing or otherwise guarding against or mitigating the threat or effects of the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19 and the possible consequences thereof. B, three, I think they have mixed up my pages. They have mixed up the page. Do you have like the corrected? Forgive me, Mr. Speaker, there was an error on my script. The pages were incorrectly stapled together. 3, each person landed, that is 3.1, each person landed in Jamaica from any country where there is local transmission of the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19, as published by the Ministry responsible for health and wellness from time to time, is required to proceed to that person's abode or place of residence and remain in self-quarantine for 14 days. 2, the person referred to in paragraph 1 is required to comply with the quarantine rules as outlined by the Ministry with responsibility for health and wellness, whether the abode or place of residence referred to in paragraph 1 is a hotel or not. 3, a person required to self-quarantine under this paragraph shall be permitted to leave the island before the 14-day period of self-quarantine if the person does not have any symptoms of the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19. 4, if during the period of self-quarantine a person develops symptoms of the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19, the person is required to forthwith inform the Ministry with responsibility for health and wellness. 4, a person in Jamaica who develops flu-like symptoms and who may have had contact with someone who A, has traveled to a country affected by the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19, or B, is infected with the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19, is required to forthwith inform the ministry with responsibility for health and wellness. 5.1. For a period of 7 days, beginning from the 18th day of March 2020, that's tomorrow, gatherings in any public place shall not exceed 20 persons at a time, as of tomorrow. 2, subparagraph 1 does not include. So these areas are not included. Subject to subparagraph 3A, hospitals, infirmaries, and nursing homes. B, the Jamaica Constabulary Force and the Jamaica Defense Force. Services concerning the provision of health, water, electricity, sanitation, firefighting, civil aviation, or telecommunications. Correctional services. Tourist establishment as defined in the Public Health Tourist Establishment Regulation 2000. Subject to subparagraph 3B, retail services such as markets, supermarkets, pharmacies, and corner shops, in quotations, for the provision of food, medicine, and other necessities of life. G, sittings of the Houses of Parliament and meetings of the Cabinet or any other committee thereof. The business of the country has to continue. Subject to the order, however, we can determine how we conduct the business, which we will discuss later on. Ministries, departments, and agencies of government and municipal corporations. Tax Administration Jamaica, the Bank of Jamaica, and the Jamaica Customs Agency. Banking business as defined by the Banking Act. Services connected with oil refining and with the loading, distribution, transportation, or retail of petroleum fuel, liquefied natural gas, or any renewable energy source. Services connected with the loading and unloading of ships and with the storage and delivery of goods at or from docks, wharves, and warehouses operated in connection with docks and wharves. The provision of public transportation by bus, including buses operated by the Jamaica Urban Transit Company or the Montego Bay Metro Company, limited to seated passengers only. So buses are allowed to travel, people are allowed to be on the buses, but limited to seated passengers only. The provision of public transportation by motor car, limited to one person less than the maximum amount of persons allowed to be carried under the relevant license. So presently, the approval ceiling for licenses would be 7 and 5. So now we would expect that taxi operators would observe one less than they are approved to carry, 6 and 4. Any service, activity, or public gathering authorized to be carried out on or by the medical officer or a person designated by the medical officer of health to give such authorization. So if the medical officer of health authorizes it, then you can have that. During note 3, during the period referred to in subparagraph 1, A, the operator of a hospital, infirmary, or nursing home shall ensure that no person visits a patient in the hospital, infirmary, or nursing home more than once a day, and that each such patient does not have more than one visitor per day. So we are limiting visits to hospitals, nursing homes, and infirmaries to 1 visit per day. Now, the Minister of Local Government has put in place some other measures, which at a later stage he will explain. And B, markets shall operate only during the hours of 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. 6, for a period of 7 days, beginning on the 18th day of March 2020, all persons who can work from home should do so. 2, during the period referred to in paragraph 1, an employer shall have a duty, if satisfied that an employee is able to discharge the duties of that employee from the employee's place of residence, to grant the employee permission to do so without imposing any adverse consequences to the employee in respect thereof. So just to explain this paragraph, a duty is placed upon the employer once they have assessed to see that the function of any particular employee could be carried out from home without affecting the operations of the opening and functioning of the business. Then they have a duty to have that employee operate from home without any consequence in terms of leave or deduction of pay. In other words, they continue to work, they continue to earn, but they work from home. An employee whose assigned task can only be discharged at the place of employment is required to attend for work at that place during the period referred to in subparagraph 1, that is the 7-day period, unless otherwise permitted by the employer as part of the employer's measure to combat the risk of transmission of the COVID-19 disease. 3, the grant of permission to an employee under subparagraph 1 or 2 shall not count against the leave entitlements of that employee unless otherwise agreed between the employer and the employee. 7, for a period of 7 days beginning from the 18th day of March 2020, all bars, nightclubs, and other places of amusement shall remain closed. 2, in subparagraph 1, place of amusement means any place open to the public whether for a fee or free of charge for the purpose of entertainment and without limit to the generality of the foregoing, includes a cinema, dance hall, club, open-air dance venue, amusement arcade, or any place where a coin-operated amusement machine is open to the public, a festival, discotheque, roller disco if they still exist, or a skating rink if they still exist. So, as it relates to the church has been, from my estimation, very good partners. They are self-regulating. We continue to ask that they observe the requirements here that have been placed in law, and I am expecting that they will adjust their operations according to the law. So let's just be clear, member. 20 is what is now enforced in the law as declared by the order enforced upon, well, AG. It's the language that I prefer to use as it relates to the churches. I'm asking the churches to pay attention to what we have provided and to regulate themselves accordingly. That is the language I have to use for now. So remember that this is for 7 days. We have to evaluate at 5 days. We will share the evaluation. No, we have. So I hear the member from St. Anne. No, it's important, Northwest, because in these matters, the criticism will always be, why didn't you act? And the truth is that we have acted, but there are two things that we need to balance. One, we cannot afford the economy to collapse, because if the economy collapses, the very thing that we are trying to contain, that becomes a difficulty. In order not to have a collapse, you need an orderly wind down. And therefore, we have given, in everything that we have tried to do, we have given some indication it is going to be done, then we give a notice that it is being done, and then we do it. And that is usually within a 24-hour to a 48-hour period of notice. And that is how we have been doing it. It gives the society time to adjust without the complaints and the resistance, because we are in a phase where we have to have the cooperation of the society. The truth is that we don't have enough policemen and soldiers to enforce. So we have to engage the citizens and get voluntary compliance. And this is the best way to do it, member.
Mr. Tweed? Mr. Tweed wasn't for you. Go ahead.
The central to the regulations that the Prime Minister has announced is the issue of determining those who test positive for the coronavirus. Will the Prime Minister state what is the testing capacity in Jamaica now, where can it be assessed, at what cost, and what provisions are being made for the acceleration, the multiplication of those opportunities? One. Two, will the Prime Minister state how these regulations affect those persons who work in very close proximity in the business processing outsourcing industry?
Member, I would defer any answer regarding the testing and the operations of the health system to the Minister of Health, and I will do that, but I'm considerate that the leader of the opposition has to present. Suffice to say that as of now, BPO operations should continue as regulated here. They should see how best they can have the services provided at home by their workers, and we are making some necessary adjustments, which we will announce on Thursday, to facilitate that. So the protocols for personal hygiene, maintaining distance, I think for the BPOs, they should follow those rigidly.
As stated by the Prime Minister, for whatever short duration, has caused a large number of persons in many constituencies, certainly in Central Kingston, to lose their income. What provision is the government suggesting in terms of social security payments or benefits that would allow them to continue to live while this emergency is dealt with?
Member, valid question, but I will answer you in this way. There is no doubt that the emergence of the COVID-19 crisis would have caused some fallout in the economy, and that would necessarily translate into a loss of income for some. I would not say, however, that these measures by themselves exclusively would cause persons to lose income. And indeed, member, we deliberated on them very carefully to ensure that it is done in such a way that the fallout is minimized. But the Minister of Finance will also make a statement that will go towards answering the concern that you have raised. Minister of Health, if I have your leave, Mr. Speaker, given the circumstances, the Minister of Health will answer shortly the member from St. Andrew Central. Yes, I want to.
Just quickly,
Dr. Tufton.
point of order, Mr. Speaker, point of order. My point of order is the leader of the opposition is going to speak. The Prime Minister made a statement about the general rules governing the state of national disaster declared. I am suggesting that we, after the leader of the opposition speaks, because I'm sure the members have questions to ask the Prime Minister, ask the Minister of Health, the Minister of Finance, we could come back to it today after or on another time.
Mr. Speaker, that's my view, that we should limit the questions.
Mr. Speaker. Can I get the podium? Yeah. Can I get the...
Members, please.
Mr. Speaker, the unprecedented spread of COVID-19 has created a global health crisis, and each day brings new developments around the world as countries seek to flatten the curve and achieve social distance, which is, in a very short period of time, significantly, sharply, and suddenly curtailing economic activity around the world. The Jamaican government, Mr. Speaker, led by Most Honorable Prime Minister, has taken decisive action to protect against the health effects on the Jamaican population. In economic terms, the COVID crisis will certainly have adverse economic implications for the world and indeed for Jamaica. The good news, however, Mr. Speaker, and why it's necessary to sort of make the statement here is that we don't want people to take action with information. The good news, Mr. Speaker, is that the government of Jamaica is providing a $25 billion stimulus, the largest fiscal stimulus in Jamaica's history, that could not come at a better time. Pumping $25 billion into the economy at a time of uncertainty like this helps to support economic activity in Jamaica, which is always desirable when the global environment weakens. The reduction in GCT by 1.5% from 16.5% to 15% puts $14 billion back in the hands of consumers and supports consumption. The $1 billion MSME tax credit provides critical cash flow support to MSMEs, and the dramatic reduction in regulatory fees for coconut, coffee, cocoa, and spice farmers incentivizes greater production. In this time of need for the country, it's also important that Jamaicans support our local economy by buying Jamaican. This would enhance the effect of these measures even further by supporting domestic production and domestic economic activity. Mr. Speaker, this is a time that Jamaicans are coming together to help each other, a time of shared sacrifice for the benefit of all. The banking sector, Mr. Speaker, has volunteered to forego the reduction of the asset tax I mentioned earlier for 1 year, which adds $3 billion to the $7 billion COVID contingency I announced in my budget presentation, bringing the total COVID fiscal contingency for 2020-21 to $10 billion. Mr. Speaker, the asset tax, as I mentioned, is a tax on consumers and is not good for monetary transmission. However, Mr. Speaker, given the impact of measures taken to protect the health of people around the world and the Jamaican people, it's important that we accelerate intervention and deploy it directly to those who need it first. So there's no doubt that deploying it through would lead to benefits through the monetary channel. But given the speed of the changes in the economic landscape, it's necessary to deploy that directly to people. The fiscal contingency, Mr. Speaker, is just that. It's a contingency and not a commitment to spend.
but I just want to summarize what the government is doing and is prepared to do fiscally to respond to this crisis. The government is implementing and considering further fiscal action to cushion the impact of COVID-19, and these include the following. We have waived the special consumption tax on approximately 100,000 liters of alcohol for use in the making of sanitizers. And the producer of this 100,000 would actually be donating this 100,000 to the National Health Fund and the Ministry of Health. And this will ensure that sanitizers remain available in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, we have also waived the custom duty, or we will also waive the custom duty on the importation of masks, of gloves, of hand sanitizers, and of liquid hand soap for a 90-day period, Mr. Speaker. There was a question earlier, Mr. Speaker, on the BPO sector. No, under normal circumstances, Mr. Speaker, customs requires BPO firms to keep the equipment used in their operations for which they get special treatment, in-bond treatment, physically at their place of business. So if the equipment is physically there, working from home is not easily facilitated. So what we have done, Mr. Speaker, is that we will be waiving this requirement for the equipment to be physically at the premises for a specific period to facilitate working from home and to facilitate business continuity. Mr. Speaker, we're in discussions with commercial banks for them to provide temporary cash flow support to businesses and consumers in affected sectors through deferral of principal payments, through new lines of credit and other measures. And various banks are implementing various forms of these interventions on their own, with their own customers. So speaking to customers, business and consumers about deferring principal payments, about new lines of credit that could be accessed, in some cases lowering of fees and other interventions to cushion the economic impact to businesses and households. Mr. Speaker, we will introduce the COVID allocation of resources for employees, the CARE program, which will have the following elements. The first is the Business Employee Support and Transfer of Cash program, and we're calling that the Best Cash program, which will provide temporary cash transfers to businesses in target sectors based on the number of workers that they keep employed. So you keep a certain number of workers employed for April, you get the number of workers times the amount. And for May, the number of workers times the amount. Mr. Speaker, we'll be implementing what we call the Supporting Employees with a Transfer of Cash program, Set Cash, which will provide temporary cash transfers to individuals where it can be verified that they lost their employment since the first case of COVID in Jamaica, which was a week ago, and due to this, the events surrounding that. And this will be available for a specific period of time. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, have a special soft loan fund to assist individuals and businesses who have been hit hard by the emergence of these problems, and aiming to provide it to those hit hardest first. And fourth, Mr. Speaker, we will have a tranche to support the poor and vulnerable with special, whether or not they are any of the categories above, with special COVID-related grants. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are finalizing the details of the implementation, the accountability mechanisms for these programs, the specific amounts involved, and I will speak to those next Tuesday, and we'll be using the time between now and then to ensure that the accountability mechanisms are in place, that these measures can be done in a transparent manner and with broad stakeholder involvement in the process. Right? Ultimately, it will be the government who disburses, but I want to ensure that we incorporate broad stakeholders in the allocations. Clearly, we will never have enough for every single case and every single person to benefit. But, Mr. Speaker, in previous crises, we've not been able to mount this kind of counter-cyclical response, and we hope that, and we know that it will alleviate to some extent, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, an adverse economic impact from COVID-19 is unavoidable. However, the government is implementing and will implement a range of economic policy tools to help cushion against the effects. And working together, supporting each other, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica will overcome this. And these fiscal stimulus measures will give us the best opportunity for our eventual economic recovery. Yeah, the details will come. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say something on what will be a third supplementary estimate and the first supplementary for next year. Mr. Speaker, we will need to table and have passed before the end of this financial year a third supplementary estimate for 2019-20. The severe disruption caused by COVID-19 globally, which has escalated daily over the past week and resulted in increasingly stringent measures around the world to safeguard global populations and the Jamaican population, has economic spillovers. With the measures announced yesterday and late last week, we will need to make budgetary reallocations in a manner that reflects our response to date and directs available unutilized amounts to the contingencies fund so we can use it in 2020-21. This will better prepare Jamaica to weather the economic effect of COVID-19 in 2020-21. I'm therefore, Mr. Speaker, just advance notice requesting the forbearance of my parliamentary colleagues on the PAAC, the Standing Finance Committee, and the House of Representatives to work with us to expedite the passage of the third supplementary estimates for 2019-20 before the end of the fiscal year, along with the passage of the appropriation bill for 2020-21. This will require tabling the third supplementary estimates on Tuesday, March 24th, 2020, and on the following day, Mr. Speaker, with your cooperation, having the PAAC, House Leader, having the Standing Finance Committee, and the debate and passage of those estimates. And then, Mr. Speaker, very, very early in the new financial year, meaning the first week or two of April, we intend to table the first supplementary estimates for 2020-21 that will be geared specifically towards accommodating the expenditure side of the fiscal stimulus. We would like to get these funds out early, and so again, I'll be requesting the forbearance of parliamentary colleagues for a swift process that is responsive to the circumstances. Working together, Mr. Speaker, and working together in this chamber, Jamaica will recover from the economic effect of COVID-19. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Laid on the table of the House today is a copy of the report of the Joint Select Committee on its deliberations on the bill shortly entitled the Data Protection Act 2017.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, reports from committees.
Mr. Speaker, we have today the presentation by the Leader of the Opposition, and in the interest of time, for us to get this Parliament through as quickly as possible, because everybody here busy, preoccupied with preparing all that is necessary to carry us through this difficult period. I'm going to ask that we suspend the report from committees and move directly to public business where the Leader of the Opposition can make his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? Public business.
Much obliged, Mr. Speaker. Except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. My prayer today is for mercy, peace, and favor for Jamaica, and for us to overcome the myriad challenges so our people can thrive and enjoy the abundance of God's grace. Mr. Speaker, I've been in this Parliament for 25 years, and I've made a contribution to every budget debate for the past 9. But, Mr. Speaker, I think we'll all agree this one is unique. It takes place in the unprecedented circumstances defined by the spread of the coronavirus, COVID-19 disease, across the world and across our beloved country, Jamaica. To every single person here in Jamaica that is infected with the coronavirus, we pray that you will have a full recovery as quickly as possible. Our hearts go out to their families and to persons in the affected communities as well. I want to reach out also to all the persons who are confined in quarantine or in isolation. We know this is not an easy time for you, as you live each day with the weight of worry and uncertainty. Mr. Speaker, I believe I speak on behalf of all of us here in saying to those affected that our prayers and good wishes are with them for as quick a return to normal life as possible. Our heartfelt gratitude to the nurses, doctors, ambulance drivers, police, military personnel, other health workers, and so many others across the country, the sanitation workers who are on the front line doing their best to protect the people in the midst of this crisis. I have every faith that the courage and resilience that has served us well as a people for generations will carry us through this very difficult time. Indeed, I encourage every Jamaican to make the right decisions to keep safe and healthy, especially over the next few weeks, as we all seek to contain and minimize the spread of the COVID-19 and restrict and limit its impact on our country. As such, Mr. Speaker, I've taken steps to curtail gallery attendance today. At this time, we must not risk the safety of our people and contribute to the spread of this deadly virus by bringing crowds into the confined spaces of Parliament. So even though the regulations don't take full effect till tomorrow, I've asked all concerned who indicated a desire to attend that really in the interest of the country, and I dare say the interest of the party, because we don't want the disease spreading to any Jamaican, whether friend, close relative, or otherwise. Nevertheless, even in their absence, there are persons I must thank, as none of us get to this house to make our contribution without the support, guidance, and encouragement of others. First, to the people of East Central St. Andrew, who have returned me as their Member of Parliament over the last 25 years. My sincere thanks, respect, and love. I thank Councillors Nana Wilson and Dennis Gordon, who represent the Hagley Park and Maxwell Park divisions, respectively, for their continued efforts and their support, as well as Waynette Strachan, who leads our efforts in the Cassia Park division. I'm also indebted to the members of the constituency executive, the divisional executives, and to the workers of the People's National Party in East Central St. Andrew. You want to join? Yes. She's part of the people of Cassia Park. I would also like to thank my comrades and colleagues in the People's National Party, both those in Parliament and those outside. Their continuing guidance, support, encouragement, and prayers have been invaluable and a source of strength to me over many years, especially in this past year. I'd also particularly like to express appreciation to my family, my wife Sandra, as well as my children. Michael is here, but Sahai, David, Ruth, Jacob, and Luke. I'll not fill out the 12 apostles yet, but without their love and without their support, indeed the support of my entire family, the task I have taken on would be infinitely more difficult. My other sources of personal support include my household staff, members of my security detail. As leader of the opposition, I'm particularly indebted to my fellow parliamentarians, the shadow cabinet, the team at the office of the leader of the opposition, anchored by Imani Duncan Price, and the team at the headquarters of the People's National Party at 89 Old Hope Road, led by the General Secretary, who is also a Member of Parliament for Southeast St. Andrew. A special place is reserved for the thousands of Jamaicans who offer their prayers and their guidance as we work for the success of Jamaica. I appreciate the many personal conversations, emails, letters, messages, posts, and the like, as they share their hopes and aspirations for our mission. To you, Mr. Speaker, the Clerk of the House, and her staff, thanks are also due. I want to congratulate, in this section also, the member for South St. Andrew and Shadow Minister of Finance and Planning, Mark Golding, for the insightful and powerful contribution to this debate that he made last week. He effectively revealed many deficiencies in the budget as presented. All of us, Mr. Speaker, are gripped by the fearful experience and the prospect of the spread of the coronavirus. Indeed, in many respects, as the Minister of Finance, in his serial announcements of various measures, and the fact that we will have both the final supplementary budget for 2019-20 fiscal year and the first supplementary budget for the 2020-21 fiscal year, is really in effect indicating that the coronavirus has basically nullified the budget that was presented to us. We don't say this in a contentious way. It's just a fact that we all have to deal with. But I'm still going to say some things about the budget as presented, because it reflects pattern of thinking, a set of priorities that the government has. But I think I have to begin, Mr. Speaker, by speaking to the issues posed by the COVID-19 pandemic which the country now confronts. This COVID-19 pandemic will have reset the ways governments operate and societies operate before its effects subside in the world economy. Put another way, the world and indeed Jamaica are entering a new paradigm of economic and social operations, which is not yet altogether clear. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that in relation to COVID-19, with the dozen and more persons affected, going to 2 dozen, the numbers move so rapidly, the crisis and all of crises like this require a national response. All hands need to be on deck. All of us need to do our part. We support the efforts that have been taken by the government and the authorities that are needed to stem the transmission of the virus and contain the impact on the health of the Jamaican people. Our team of members of parliament, mayors, councillors, and caretakers are also working in their respective constituencies, divisions, and areas so that they can provide support for the national effort. We have also set up a task force within the ranks of the People's National Party. We have a number of doctors, some with particular expertise in public health, in order for them to keep alive their consideration of the issues and to share them with the public and generally with the authorities should they want, and with anyone else. We are seeking to make our contribution. As I indicated in this House, had we been faced with this crisis, we would have found a mechanism to embrace all stakeholders, from private sector, churches, trade unions, civic organizations, including the disaster committee and the political parties. A whole of country approach is what I call that, not just a whole of government approach. The benefit of a national stakeholder approach, especially if it had been done in a timely fashion, is that I believe Jamaicans would have been better prepared for this crisis. It was no secret as the crisis hit China in December and became apparent to all globally by January, as it developed in the new year, that it was likely to be global in scope. The world has faced some of these before. SARS, for example. Ebola outbreaks have taken place before. In a very prescient TED post, Bill Gates, last year, pointed out that the danger the world faces now is not so much from nuclear war, but from a pandemic of this sort. Once we knew that this was going to happen, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people affected in China, we should have begun our preparations here because the spread was inevitable. It is then that the hand sanitizers should have been stockpiled by odd pen, the personal protective gear, medicines, test kits, and the like. We should have been preparing. We should have been preparing for our water supply systems, urban and rural, ordering pumps and such, so that the advice, good advice that is being given, that we should wash hands regularly, would also be meaningful advice. Because we still have a lot of people all around the country, including in our main towns like the corporate area, who just don't have any water in the pipe when they turn it on. We should have been taking this January to February period to reconfigure our accident and emergency areas at our hospitals so that persons suspected of COVID would be able to present in separate areas rather than mixing with the general population. We should have been trying to expand our intensive care units to deal with severe cases. That's the kind of proactive approach that took place when we faced the Ebola crisis in 2014 under the leadership of Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller. And it was the same kind of approach taken when the Gulf War occurred under then Prime Minister Patterson was head of government. One of the things in crisis management which we ought to have learned as a country, and we must reinforce it now, that you assume the worst even as you hope for the best. Prepare. The truth is the $7 billion contingency budget would have given the country more bang for the buck if it had been front-loaded in expenditure going all the way back to January and February. Now we're trying to catch up in many respects. One of the things that is striking is that we had the discussion in Standing Finance Committee. And in fact, there was no mention at all of the COVID threat or its implications for the budget or the economy until it was raised, I believe, by the member from Southeast St. Andrew. In addition to the health effects, the economic effects, as the minister is now saying, and it wasn't far-fetched to envisage that there would be economic effects. But the economic effects are critical. In fact, it would have been hard to predict the full extent because every day, every hour, we are seeing the effects on the economic side play out with even more devastating impact than could have been imagined. But in our case, tourism, we're having cancellations every day of forward bookings. The cruise ship industry has taken a hit. Airlines are down. American Airlines suspending 75% of its international flights. Delta, similarly. Major airlines are, in effect, going to add their blow to our tourism industry simply because there's not the airlift capacity. As the world economy contracts, the demand for bauxite and alumina has already been reduced. And bauxite, alumina prices and aluminum prices continue to fall. Port operations in the country have been and will be further affected. Now, the recently announced restrictions on gatherings, advisable though they are going to add more pressure, particularly on retail operations, bars, restaurants, hairdressers, dentists, lawyers, factories. One dentist that I know had 13 appointments cancelled one day. Not surprisingly, but this is what is going to happen. Hairdressers, barbers, scaling down operations, these personal services. We're in for a rough ride, Mr. Speaker, as economic contraction grips the Jamaican economy. Our small and medium-sized companies and their workers and families will be the most harshly affected, but not the only ones, by the disruptions caused by this global pandemic. If we are to prevent a lasting fallout that will cripple the economy even after the health effects have passed, then we're going to have to consider and implement an extensive set of fiscal and monetary responses. The Minister of Finance, in his statement just made, spoke to some of his thinking, but the fact that he is unable to quantify the costs and the effects at this time. There are some specific proposals that we'd like to put for your consideration. First of all, we have to soften the crisis on the workers and the own account operators and the small and medium-sized enterprises. There's some effort made to provide relief for sanitizers and some of the other commodities needed, but I want to repeat the suggestion that for a limited period, 3 months I'm suggesting, that you remove the GCT on over-the-counter medicines that are vital to assist the recovery of affected persons. Paracetamol, Panadol, vitamin C, and those kinds of commodities. For the small business sector, again, we're proposing that the government waive penalties on the non or late payment of GCT for a period of time. Again, suggesting about 3 months. We urge, I am happy that the banks are considering some of the proposals and the requests of some of the businesses about a moratorium on repayment of loans. But equally, I think for the small businesses and the own account operators, something is going to have to be done to relieve some of that pressure that they're going to face. Let me give an example, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Harrison, could be from your constituency, but I'm thinking of somebody now from St. Anne. Buys a Juta bus, brand new. His plan, when he ordered it, is to move cruise ship passengers. Those passengers have disappeared. But he still has payments due to the bank. So he has payments coming, and he has no revenue. The banks need to include Mr. Harrison in their arrangements for the moratorium, not just the big enterprises. Also, a line of credit needs to be made available to these small businesses, maybe through the DBJ or some other mechanism to provide support for their working capital. Let me explain the problem that many small businesses are going to have. And I know you're working through this every day. It's not said in a contentious way. No one-upmanship. Just some thoughts we're putting forward for your consideration. That's good. You know, the thing is just start taking notes too late. But hear me. Everybody is employed and entitled to sick leave. In the normal course of operations, a business doesn't expect more than 1%, maybe a little bit more of its workers to fall ill at any one time. Right. In this situation, you're likely to face a situation with 10% or more, maybe falling ill at the same time. So the business has to pay out up to 14 days of pay for sick leave, and if, depending on the operations, it might need to hire temporary workers. At the same time, demand is cutting into their revenues, the contraction of demand. There should be some window, DBJ or some other place where a line of credit can be extended to these small business operators to deal specifically with the problem of workers. Unless they get some support, many of these businesses will go out of operation, and then it's going to be harder to get them up again after coronavirus has moved on. So we need to protect the foundations of our economy. Businesses are going to have to consider as well that many of these workers may use up their entire statutory leave entitlement. And if they're not paid, their households can't survive. You know, it is said, Mr. Speaker, that the average family should have 3 months savings, 3 months of monthly expenditures as savings. But we know that the vast majority of our people don't have that. And that they live every day. That's why people go and buy a squeeze of toothpaste, a slice of bread, and things they don't have when they are laid off. Many of them won't have the means to survive. How we have to do that? No, we need to recognize also that there's a special category of workers. I've spoken and will speak further about the contract workers, but there is a particular way that they may be affected in this fallout, because many of those forced into quarantine, places like Bull Bay and elsewhere, are contract workers without any security of tenure. I want to suggest that if you can identify the Minister of Health in your tracing and tracking, that a dialogue be had with their employers to try to ensure that they are not displaced because they don't have the entitlement to the sick leave and the other provisions that are there. Many can just end up not just in the unemployment line, but in the already overburdened heap of the poor who are finding it difficult to survive. We spoke about small business, but the truth is I don't want to suggest that big operators, particularly in the tourism industry, are not going to be facing some problems. Many properties have lines of credit and are indebted to a great extent. And we need to recognize that if they shut their doors, they're going to have a problem meeting their expenses. The banks seem to have been responsive, but again, the government needs to recognize that there is a national interest, even in the midst of it. Whether it is just by facilitating a dialogue or in the Bank of Jamaica using its leverage, we need to recognize that this problem filters down. The large business employs workers. That hotel sending home its workers is going to need to reopen at some point, but we also need to ensure that those workers who are entitled to leave pay get leave pay so that they can survive. I've suggested that you consider, in the interests of those who need something, that a moratorium, maybe 1 month, on NHT repayments. You could urge the board. You have been chairman there. Not you? You have been on the board. Was? No. You have been there. You have been there. You have never been there. You have been there. Don't deny it. You didn't commit a robbery. Yes, you were. Yeah.
Members, the member time for speaking has expired. House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the member's time be extended sufficient to enable him to complete his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it, Dr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, there is a special category that attention needs to be paid to as we go through this crisis. That is the pensioners. Many of our elderly are seeing people stock up with food but are unable to do so. We recommend that the Ministry of Labour take immediate steps to enable early encashment of pension checks for the period up to the end of May, to allow the elderly to prepare as best as possible. Also, still on the point of the elderly, what about the coverage of the people on NI Gold? Currently, the insurance provides only $5,000 for the year. Adjustment could be made, in fact, should be made, as it is the only form of health insurance coverage that these persons have. All of these practical measures are possible by creatively looking at the budget while maintaining a commitment to fiscal responsibility. Prime Minister, I sent you a letter. Oh, you're just reading it? Okay. I brought a copy in case you didn't, but simply put, he's a cantankerous fellow. Mr. Prime Minister, we have been in touch with the Cuban authorities. I've received reports that they have medicines that can be helpful in fighting COVID-19. The medicine interferon, right, has been used in 14 other jurisdictions in Asia and Europe, including Spain. I have confirmed that it exists and that they'd be willing to make it available, but it needs a request from you. I'm commending it for your consideration, as it would help to reduce the incidence of infection, or in the event of infection, could reduce the severity of the infections. Certainly, what we're learning is that what the world is learning in the face of this COVID-19 effect is that the disease, pandemics know no political, philosophical, or ideological boundaries. We need to pull together here at home and we need to pull together in the global community too. Also on the health side, and without making heavy weather of it, I've had several requests from health professionals who have suggested that it would be useful if Ministry of Health just simply adopt a standard reporting format for the duration of the crisis, which could set out clearly number of confirmed cases, the number of suspected cases, format same time each time, number of persons tested from among the suspected cases, total number of cases tested, communities affected, numbers in isolation, the numbers in quarantine. In addition, it would be useful to tell the public what qualifies you to be tested and where to go. This is not said with any contentiousness, but it is said in a desire to help, and above all, to quell people's understandable fears and concerns. There's one particular area too. I think that some of the health workers are asking Minister of Health that some attention be paid to their transportation after hours. It's an issue. I know that there are many issues that are coming up on the radar all at once, but we can deal with that. Now, as I said, even though the budget has to a large extent been nullified by the crisis, there are some fundamental issues in it that still need to be addressed. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, when I listen to the government's presentation on the budget, both in Parliament and their general view of the country, sometimes I wondered if there is an awareness of the realities facing the majority of the people in the country. Even before the COVID or the 19 crisis or the coronavirus crisis, the reality for the majority of Jamaicans was one where prices for food increased frequently and rapidly, often in relation to the vagaries of the value of the Jamaican dollar. Most have been victims or witnesses to violent crimes, especially murder, gripping the country. The Minister of Finance opened the budget last week with a description of bubbling up and country moving in the right direction. That is not the reality for the majority, who are barely eking out a living from hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. I was struck also that Jamaica received no acknowledgement, no apology, no expression of shame for the failure of the government to properly protect the resources of the taxpayers from those who had the run of Petrojam and the Caribbean Maritime University and Nestle, to name just a few examples of gross mismanagement and corruption. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance in particular have that special duty, that solemn duty, to ensure that the hard-earned money of the taxpayers are not stolen by or diverted by ministers or other public officials who have taken the oath of office. I have had many conversations with people across the country from different walks of life, hearing their deepest concerns, their fears, their dreams. They are not experiencing the bubbling up, and they don't feel the country is moving in the right direction. Let me tell you what they're concerned about. Many talk about living in fear. They can't sleep with their doors and windows open. They rush home so they can barricade themselves behind burglar bars, praying that their families will be safe. Our students from primary school to university are living in fear. Fear of violence, fear of abduction by rogue transport operations. We have seen the painful case of Jasmine Dean, a visually impaired student who has been missing for almost 3 weeks. Mr. Speaker, we pray for her safe return and ask anyone with information to share it with the police so that her family can find some solace and peace. In recent times, our schools have become increasingly violent. Teachers who should be preparing lesson plans too often leave home in fear, gearing up to face the conflicts of the day. Conflicts between students and teachers, or between teachers and other parents. Too many of our schools have become battlegrounds of violent conflict rather than centers of learning. In almost every area of our national life, fear reigns. The nurse who kisses her child goodnight as she heads for her night shift is worried about leaving her family behind because of what might befall them. The small farmer who rises before daylight lives in fear that he might have to confront those who have come to reap where they didn't sow. The businessman fears going to the bank to make his deposit lest he be trailed and robbed. Pensioners fear going to the supermarket or the ATM because they may be robbed on their way home. Jamaica has had its share of problems over the years, but in recent times there's been a heightened level of fear as violence has intensified and public disorder and murder have become prevalent. Long before coronavirus hit Jamaica, the country was in deep crisis. Crisis in murder, violence, criminality, high levels of corruption in government, crisis of poor governance, low levels of economic growth, and growing inequality. Sadly, as was pointed out by the member from South St. Andrew and Shadow Minister of Finance and Planning in an excellent presentation this week, the budget of 2021 does not point us to a way out of the deepening national crisis which was threatening us even before the onset of coronavirus. Mr. Speaker, before I go into the shortcomings of the budget, I want to say something about the budgetary process. My colleague to my left, the Shadow Minister of Finance, has dealt with this matter in some depth. He focused on the Nicodemus approach, my words, of the Minister of Finance to the adjustment of the primary surplus target. The fact that the Minister would allow the deliberations of the Standing Finance Committee to start without having the benefit of the Auditor General's assessment of the fiscal policy paper, or that he would allow the fiscal policy paper to go forward on the basis of false targets regarding the primary surplus target. No, let me explain it to you. And I'm going to take time. Just hear me. It should have been brought. I understand that the report was sent by the Auditor General. Long before. No, but the minister should at least ask for it because he knows that it needs to form part of the discussion. But it's not that is not even my main point. I am more concerned about the approach to the change of the primary surplus target without it being brought to the attention of the Standing Finance Committee. You know, or the Auditor General. Last Tuesday, Minister of Finance made a proclamation that we must never again allow the buildup of an unsustainable public debt. We agree. I think all of us in the House agree with that. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we on this side like to think that we are the architects of the most recent debt reduction effort. It was through the sacrifice of the people under the leadership of the most honorable Portia Simpson Miller, and with great effort by me in the Ministry of Finance, that we set Jamaica on the path to debt reduction. It is in order to prevent any ambush, any possibility of sleight of hand or fly-by-night approaches to budget preparation and to unprogrammed expenditure while the new fiscal rules were put in place. The vision that was at work in having the Auditor General's department provide an independent assessment was to follow a model. The model that exists in the Congressional Budget Office in the United States, for example, or the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, it's called in the United Kingdom, so that there can be an independent assessment, not just that of the Ministry of Finance, because we have had a past that led us to the build-up of a debt. Just to place the full scope of the history before us, we spent a long time during that years when this decision was being made, figuring out how to ensure this independent assessment. We debated whether we should have a department of the Parliament set up, as is the case in the UK and Congress in the US. But we came down on the side that the Auditor General's department has a high reputation already established for independence. It was true that their strong suit, their main abilities were more in the field of financial accounting and performance auditing, but their independence, recognized by all and sundry, tilted us in the direction of saying, let us attach an office for economic and financial analysis of the budget there. It's still a work in progress. It's still a work in progress. But when you start to undercut and sidestep the rules, you are not assisting the evolution of the process. You're not bringing accountability to it. When you do that, it makes the proclamation that you want to protect against the buildup of debt sound like it's just social chat. The process has to survive beyond you or me. It's not just for us as individuals. I am not doubting your bona fides or your own personal intentions. I am saying that we strengthen our country when we build institutions, and that you must undermine the institutions that you're building. And remember, Minister, remember, remember that in this document, you sign an assurance. It's on page 7 of part 1. And in that assurance, you say, in the fiscal policy paper, you sign an assurance that in this fiscal responsibility statement, and I'm quoting, I hereby declare that in pursuing the policy objectives of the government, I will adhere to the principles of prudent fiscal management and manage fiscal risk accordingly. And here's the rub. You say, and I quote further, in so doing, I hereby attest to the reliability, accuracy, and completeness of the information contained in the fiscal policy paper and its compliance to fiscal policy principles. End of quote. And it is signed Nigel Clark, D.Phil, MP, Minister of Finance and Public Service. It's the last statement inside there. You can't testify to 7.5%. 6.5%. Sign it. It's 6%. 6%. It is good to pay it down, but it is also good, Minister, without in changing the primary surplus target, without informing the Auditor General, without informing the Standing Finance Committee, you have made your own words false. And ministers of finance must never be known for falsehoods. Must never.
A word must be a word.
And nobody should be too big to say, look, I made a mistake. You can go through with that. Nobody should ever be too big to say that. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, nevertheless, one of the things we're going to have to learn as a country, Mr. Speaker, is how to put aside the partisan or personal desires, because of much of that, whoever was responsible, whichever side, we built up that unsustainable debt. I am happy that the debt is coming down, with God as my witness, with all that the Jamaican people have suffered, with all the personal anguish and insults that I had to suffer, and that Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller had to suffer at the hands of international agencies and global financiers. I would never want, and you too, and hold on, no, hear me. Well, I know. Hold on. Hold on, man. Hold on. Well, hold on. No, hold on. No.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker. No, you wait. You're talking. Mr. Speaker,
Members, order, please.
Mr. Speaker, I was never claiming that is only me want them insult or me and Portia, because I am happy to know, and I'm saying this, I am happy to know, I am happy to know, and I say it in the utmost of sincerity, that since you also suffered those indignities, you know why I want to see the institutions built up in the parliament. So long after we have passed, and our children and grandchildren are in this parliament, we no run no risk. We run no risk again of it ever going wrong. You know, I am not denying that you had your pressure too. You know, one of the things that I was, Mr. Speaker.
Members.
It shows you how misunderstanding can go, because one of the things I was trying to say to the minister, but him take umbrage, is that I am glad that the debt is going down. I am happy for it. We're not unhappy that the debt is going down. I am happy for it, and I wanted to ensure that whenever it happens, years after, it can't happen. It's all right, but it is not just about you. It is about how we protect the country. I want to say another word of appreciation. I can't even hear what you say. I can't even hear what you say. I thought you were going to sit down up there. I want to say another word. I believe that our tax reform proposals of 2012 proposed getting the GCT rate down to 10. That's the ultimate objective, 10%. And on that basis, and on the basis of us having the fiscal space, I am particularly happy to see 1.5% taken off the GCT. I would have preferred 2, but as it is, you pick 1.5, it resonates with you, that's good. But I'm happy. Now, what I'm concerned about, however, is that the budget doesn't tackle the transformation that the country requires. We need to grasp as a parliament, we need to grasp as a country that as we pay down the debt and as more budgetary resources become available, the key question that this generation is going to have to answer is how are we going to spend those resources? We can either fritter them away in corruption-enabling schemes like debushing in 2016, or in political palliatives in search of electoral advantage, or we can once and for all confront the desperate need for social transformation, which will lead us to a new day in Jamaica.
That's correct.
This is the new Jamaica that our people yearn for. There can be no doubt that today the immediate challenge centers upon the matter of crime and social disorder, which drives fear in the heart of every Jamaican and stifles the dreams and hopes of too many. We need to recognize that tackling the problem of crime, particularly violence and murder, is going to involve a long-term, let me emphasize it, long-term and sustained plan of action. The Prime Minister makes the point time and time again that it took a long time for the country to get here. Confronting it, reducing it, overcoming it is going to take time. Yet this budget offers no hope in that regard. The overall budget on national security is down as compared to last year. The capital budget for the Ministry of National Security is down by 4 billion. In fact, taking account of inflation, the national security budget is reduced by 8% in real terms. How can we do this when murders are on the rise? How can we manage with less resources to stem the slaughter that is taking place? No doubt the answer will be that there was a big expenditure last year, year before, for radars and marine craft and aircraft. That's desirable. But the fact is that we need to sustain, and I'm talking for you, we need to sustain the higher levels of expenditure in this area if we are going to get on top of the problem. It can't be fixed with boom one year and bust the next year as far as budgetary allocations are taking place. If we are going to get on top, of this problem, we need to have the intensified social interventions like the Peace Management Initiative. We need more police cars every year, each year, not some 1 year and curtail the next year. We need new and effective intelligence gathering equipment, new and upgraded police stations, better training facilities. And you need to collect your money on your used car deal that this guy leave you with. A multi-year commitment to an expansionary budget for the security services is what this country needs. Mr. Speaker, in addition, we have to recognize that we have to make a better effort in relation to education as well, especially in the face of this rising crime. Today, the task of educational transformation is even more urgent given the state of murder and violence. It is necessary to return the country to a state of harmony. This will require extensive resocialization of whole generations. Even more, we have to recognize the continued injustice represented by what we call educational apartheid arrangements that we have in the country. We have 2 tiers in the secondary schooling arrangements. In one set of schools, the majority of students, 7 out of 10, matriculate with 5 or more CSEC subjects, which they secure at one sitting. In another set of schools, in fact, the majority of the secondary schools, is not 7 out of 10 who matriculate, but 8 out of 10 who fail using the same standards. It is not that these children are less capable or less ambition. It is that the country's education system is failing them. One set of school. One of the things, one of the things that is besetting us, is that we can't let go of the tribalism for a little bit, just to consider how as a country we're going to deal with it. So what I am saying to you, so one set of schools has labs and music rooms and art studios, and the other set don't have any. One set of schools have social support, past student associations that are ready to jump into the breach when problems start happening, and another set of schools don't have it yet. Too often, we're giving all the schools the same amount of money. We have to take some fundamental decisions now. Yes. What the budget though in education is not, if you include inflation, it is not keeping pace with the needs. We have to make some big. The fact is, when you look at the performance since 2016, the JLP government has dropped the button. It's like, we understand the image. You're going around the race, you're handing off. And I'm supposed to make the burst to the tape, but they dropped the button. The people who had been promising bitter medicine, as you said, in 2011, were able to claim the promise of prosperity in 2016. They could only have done so. They could only have done so on the basis of the foundation led by Portia Simpson Miller's administration. We left them growth of 1.5% in early 2016, with 2% growth by October 2016. No, that economy was bubbling so much that the Minister of Finance was able to proclaim 5 in 4. With some blinking lights and New Kingston thing and what? Poverty levels were falling for 3 straight years. Unemployment was trending downwards. Murders were down on every measure ease of doing business had improved. Transparency was improving. We left them with shovel-ready projects. Royalton in Negril and Trelawney. Expansion in Bahia Principe in St. Anne. Several BPO projects. After 4 years, what has been delivered? Growth is down. Poverty is up. Crime and violence in our society are up. Now with 7 parishes, half the island under a state of emergency, murders are up and have been up since 2016. Ease of doing business is down as measured by the World Bank. Local business confidence is down, and governmental and ministerial corruption is worse. Is this the prosperity that was promised? The Minister of Finance wants us to believe that bauxite accounts for the failure of the economy to grow. Leave aside the 5 in 4 promise. The issue with the bauxite sector is the failure of the government to properly anticipate and see the sector through its ups and downs. When they were changing the arrangements with Naranda, we warned them that you're moving in the wrong direction if you're allowing more and more mining of unprocessed bauxite. It's contrary to policy, and it's a bad thing to change the tax arrangements. Is it the case, as I have been informed, but I pose it as a question, that negotiations with Wildalco, who have been arguing that their prices of production, costs of production, have been going up, are uncompetitive in the current market, but the discussions have dragged on for 1 year. No response. This reminds of 2008. 2008, when the merle market was crashing, you had people saying, no man, it won't happen here. No anticipation, bad management, drop the button. Now we are at the point where there is prospect that that plant could close and workers lose their jobs. This is a failure to manage. The sector is in crisis because of the failure of the government to manage. It doesn't stop there. The Minister of Finance cannot just blame the lack of growth on bauxite alumina alone. In agriculture, the sugar industry has been totally decimated. Mash up from Westmoreland through to Clarendon to St. Thomas. Factory closures, factory closures, factory closures. I won't even say it. Because you try and at it first, you said it wasn't a problem. You have the sugar under control, but we can't get the factories open back in Clarendon. You couldn't stop what is happening in, or didn't stop, what was happening in St. Thomas. It's not bauxite alone that crashed. The same thing happened with cocoa, coffee and other export crops. The reality is too much politics and too little management. Look at project implementation in the major infrastructure development program. The overruns are in excess of 2.3 billion Jamaican dollars. Wow. Just as bad was the chaotic and destructive way in which the roadworks were done. The disruption of water for months in the corporate area. Businesses along the Constant Spring corridor and the Hagley Park corridor have closed, and some will never ever reopen. Internet destruction and disruption for the business people and their families, just because of poor management of the project. We were told it had to be done then. close down all the traffic in all of Kingston. It had to be done then because the money wouldn't last, but it had to be finished. But even now, the project is not finished. At the other end of the spectrum, the major challenges of labor market reform, pension reform, agricultural reform, and public sector reform focused on making government departments facilitators of investment activity have all been left without serious implementation and execution. Coming around the corner in the baton handover, the JLP administration dropped the baton. You know, Mr. Speaker, I love to listen to the wisdom of the Jamaican people. A lady said to me the other day, you know, what them do, you know, Mr. Phillips, is that them thief the printer, but them not get the computer. Them only get the plans that we had, that was on the printer, but them not get the computer to actually know how to put the program together. We need to remember we need to remember that all our people made sacrifices to give the economic reform program a chance for success. They did this. We all made sacrifices because we were searching for a better life, a better future, a new day for Jamaica. People yearn for high-quality jobs offering high wages and high incomes so that they don't have to languish as most workers do, earning minimum wage or close to minimum wage. The dream of every parent is for their child to get a good education, no matter what school they attend, so that they can be successful in the world of work and become good citizens. That is the new Jamaica that they seek. Jamaicans want a country of law-abiding citizens without the high levels of murder and where they no longer have to live in fears of violent criminals. We want communities of stakeholders where people have their own key to their own home, and whether you rent or whether you own, you are guaranteed dignity in your home. This new Jamaica is embodied in the country's 2030 vision, with Jamaica as a place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. Mr. Speaker, my entire political life has been spent trying to make a difference, to help build my country, to make a contribution to improving the quality of life of the average Jamaican. It is what has driven everything that I have done as an adult. Whether as a UWI student marching in support of Walter Rodney during the 1960s Black Power protests, or as a 12-tribe Rasta man, the righteous cause of the people has been my passion. From the very first project I did in government, coordinating the Greater Portmore project to build 10,000 houses so working people could own a home in dignity, through to all the other opportunities of service. The JADEP, the Drugs for the Elderly program, which we helped design and established so thousands of elderly Jamaicans could get their medication at lower cost. The cause of the people has been my mission. God bless PJ Patterson. It was what drove me when we established the JUTC. Mr. Speaker, our school children shouldn't have to endure the cry of no schoolers or risk death just to catch a bus to school. One thing I am most proud of, although some have criticized me, are the measures we took to save Jamaica from the terror and mayhem of the cocaine trade and the narco traffickers. This same commitment to building a better Jamaica drove us to rescue the Jamaican economy. We had two fundamental goals: to preserve the existence of Jamaica as a viable and independent nation state, keeping alive our chance of fulfilling the dreams of generations, past and present, and the prospect of satisfying the aspirations and hopes of future generations. And second, to continue the task of creating a society and economy that put the Jamaican people truly at the center of growth and development. Making a better life for the Jamaican people is at the heart of what we stand for in the People's National Party. The People's National Party stands for building a better Jamaica, a Jamaica that works for all and not just a few. That is why Norman Manley introduced common entrance and started land reform. It was the desire to create a country of equal rights for all that motivated Michael Manley to institute equal pay for women and provide for workers' rights for collective bargaining, and that is also why he established in his administration the National Housing Trust. The concern of the plight of the poor led PJ Patterson to establish the PATH program for the advancement through health and education. And it was our love for the Jamaican people which made Sister P guide the rescue of the Jamaican economy so skillfully. And she insisted that the economic reform program should not be done at the expense of social programs, and so as to maintain a basic standard of living for the people. Despite all the efforts as a country, we are still too far away from that dream. The dream of our forefathers and mothers to make our Jamaica a land where everyone has opportunity. To have a Jamaica that works for all the people. Consider, for example, the thousands upon thousands of producers and service providers who are really the heart and soul of our economy, yet are still on the margins of our financial and production systems. I'm talking about people like Junior, who has a cabinet shop under a mango tree in Russia, in Savlamar. Errol, who sells his natural juices under a breadfruit tree on the way to Portland. And the thousands and thousands who have their sidewalk garages. I'm talking about Miss Maisie, who has 4 sewing machines on her back veranda, and she and her team make school and factory uniform and clothes for her church sisters. Our mission is to bring these people from the backyard to the front line of entrepreneurship and business. We want to have them as part of the mainstream, growing their businesses, having savings and investments, and being able to get loans to expand and earn more in order to take care of their families. The new Jamaica which we are committed to building will not tolerate Steve, the pan chicken man, being run off the street under a state of emergency. We know that Steve has to take care of his family too and deserve to don't have to run away, but to have a place of establishment for his business. Consider as well the 1/4 of the population who live in so-called informal settlements long after Norman Manley's land reform effort started and Michael Manley's NHT got underway. We still have too many behind the zinc fence or catching on a gully bank being disparaged as squatters. No, the mission is not yet complete. We must fulfill that mission. Mr. Speaker, as I said, don't forget either that only a minority of our schools are given the quality of education which we all want for our children. We have gotten too used to seeing children getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning in Morant Bay to take a bus to come into Kingston to go to school because the school next door is not good enough. And they come to school, work a whole day, and at 5 o'clock they're on the bus again, going 50, 60 miles, not just Morant Bay. You have children coming from Buff Bay to town, people going from Reading to think. Is a reality. Is a reality. Is a reality. Is a reality. You have children leaving Junction to go up to Homewood. Parents know it. Ask any minister of finance. Him, the current prime minister, ministers before them, we have got too used to it. What I am appealing for is let us as a generation determine that we are going to solve the problem so that it don't beset another generation. That is what you must do. That is what you must do. These kids do homework on the bus and are open to all kinds of abuse in the 12, 14 hours they are away from home. Come man, our country can do better than that, and we must make it do better. We have a plan. I will set out our view of the main steps to build a new Jamaica, the new society and economy which our people seek. It represents the hopes and dreams of generations past, and it will fulfill the aspirations of the generations today and those to come. In order to get where we want, we'll have to take a leap of faith and abandon the long-held philosophy that sees Jamaica's future and sees our options inevitably rooted in a low-wage economic model. This model has been around since 1838 and was anchored in the view that the most attractive thing about Jamaica for the investor is low wages. As a consequence, investments in sugar and later banana drove the economy in the early years after the end of the enslavement of the Jamaican people. Was focused on a labor force with little education and on industries dependent on cheap labor and with low levels of productivity. Over time, in the 50s and 60s, new sectors emerged: bauxite, tourism, the local manufacturing sector. Bauxite started out having substantially higher wage levels and technology. But by and large, the basic model of the Jamaican economy has not changed. Time come now to make a drastic change to that outdated model which can take us no further. It cannot deliver on the expectations and aspirations of our people where 6 out of 10 Jamaicans earn the minimum wage or close to it, that can't fulfill their dreams, can't fulfill their hopes, can't fulfill the aspirations of our children. And so today we have the average Jamaican saying, boy, I just hope my people them send for me.
True.
Migration, I get a farm work card or something. We have to combine our energies of our people to strike out on a new path. Jamaicans have demonstrated in sports and music and business and in so many other areas, time and time again, that given the opportunity, we are the best in the world. No one no better than us. We need to reorganize ourselves and focus our resources on being the best that we can be right here in Jamaica. Because nowhere no better than yard. Mr. Speaker, let me state clearly that fiscal prudence remains a fundamental commitment. The biggest choice we face now as a country is how we're going to spend the additional resources that become available. We believe that there are 10 fundamental challenges, 10 fundamental tasks that will set out and define the pathway to the new Jamaica. First of all, given where we are starting now, even as we battle COVID-19, the coronavirus, we have to begin by emphasizing the need for effective crime control and the restoration of public order. That is pillar number 1. Effective crime control will involve many things: more and better trained and better rewarded police officers. It will involve sustained reform of the police force, including more civilian oversight with the amalgamation of the Police Service Commission and the Police Civilian Oversight Authority. All modern policing, Mr. Speaker, is intelligence-led policing. We need to strengthen our intelligence services. We need a new Intelligence Act. We've been talking about it. We need new and better intelligence agencies. We need leadership training in the police force and better structures of accountability for those who lead. The restoration of effective crime control must involve the closest collaboration between citizens and the security forces. Crime control will also involve more resources for extensive community-based social intervention programs. We have had several successful examples of this. We need more resources for programs like Citizen Security and Justice Program and the Peace Management Initiative. Many on that side believe that focusing on neighborhood watch, community policing and social interventions are afterthoughts that can be discarded. For us on this side, they represent the fundamental underpinning of any democracy and are important to any wholesome society. Effective crime control will involve not just police reform, but we will have to reform our prosecutorial services as well. It will require much closer collaboration between prosecutors and investigators, like that which currently occurs in the UK system on which our structure is based. It will also involve continuing reform of our courts, including establishing regional branches for our Supreme Court and technological upgrading of our entire court system. The second pillar of the societal transformation which we seek is the comprehensive transformation of our education system. As I've said before, we have to abolish educational apartheid. The next PNP government is going to lead a national mobilization of our best teaching resources, including those who have retired, to provide mentoring to both students and teachers going into school, to ensure that no one is left behind, to ensure that from year one every child is learning, ensure that every school is properly equipped, even if it means an island-wide campaign to raise resources. Children cannot go to school unprepared. It's going to require sustained budgetary commitments to provide the laboratories, the performing studios, the top-line sporting facilities that allow for a rounded education. Curriculum reform is also going to be central to this effort. Among other things, it must be directed explicitly at building the self-esteem of every Jamaican boy and girl. Too many of them today are still bearing the scars of a culture shaped by a cultural inheritance of racism, poverty, and self-denigration. As a youth that marched on behalf of Black Power in the 1960s, I have to confess that I am appalled today that we still have young boys and girls bleaching their skin, erasing their beautiful blackness. We in the PNP are committed to the cultural revolution that will stamp us out once and as an aside, Mr. Speaker, but related one, we in this house have to stop mimicking our former colonial masters. We are an independent country. Why do we still wear the wig and formal suits with ties in this parliament? It has nothing to do with you personally, Mr. Speaker. Let me hear it out. Even in the courts here in Jamaica, they have modernized and upgraded their paraphernalia. We should do it in the parliament. In Britain, they have amended their standing order so you don't need ties. We are in a tropical place. We can make some adjustments. Mr. Speaker, as an aside, let's refer this to an appropriate parliamentary committee. Symbols are important. We don't need to be wearing the accoutrements of 17th century England long after England has given them. You used to agree with me more. We not only need more schools, but we need a better standard of schools. A classroom today looks all too similar to a classroom of 60 years ago. I'm not blaming anybody. Schools must have not only labs, but music rooms and Wi-Fi service, tablets, computers for children. This is going to require financial resources. One of the most disturbing aspects of the whole CMU scandal was the apparent misuse of the resources of the National Education Trust. Because, once you lose a reputation, it's hard to get it back. The next PNP government will provide for one sure meal per day for all our children. Too many children are going to school with little or no food. We guarantee that the first child in the family that qualifies for university will get a full scholarship under the next PNP government. We committed to establish the graduate repayment opportunity work program in addition to removing the guarantors for student loan. We're going to allow people to pay back their loans through work in socially desirable tasks in the public. The third pillar of our building of the new Jamaica is our commitment to enable Jamaicans to own and have their title to a piece of this rock, Jamaica, the land of their birth. This is one of the things dearest to my heart, Mr. Speaker. This is so because an historic injustice was done to our people when compensation was paid to the slave owners who enslaved us. Oh, yes. And the formerly enslaved were turned out without resources or land. And the wandering which started then continues to this day now. Is not that the people who live in the so-called squatter settlements are worthless people? They are among some of the most hard-working people in our country. Mr. Speaker, this problem has endured so long that some 60% of our small farmers operating on less than 10 acres are working lands for which they have no title. The largest portion of these lands are so-called family lands. They have informal tenure, but they don't have the piece of paper that can enable them to go to the financial institutions, the main ones. And so they continue. They are forced to operate on the margins of our economic and financial arrangements. They can't go to the commercial bank and buy the pump to bring water from the river close by. They can't go and provide collateral to buy the pickup to take the goods to market or the small tractor. As a result, they are compelled to remain, for the most part, and are trapped in the hoe and machete technology of 100 years ago. This is why they are poor, the lack of opportunities and the lack of title. The next PNP government will undertake a series of legislative reforms that will correct this historic injustice and correct it once and for all. We will make reforms to the Registrations of Titles Act, the Limitations of Actions Act, the Local Improvements Act, the Land Surveyors Act, amongst other laws. And this land titling effort will extend far beyond the rural agricultural sector, because it will also embrace the 700,000 or so Jamaicans who live in so-called informal settlements. In the vast majority of cases, these persons who are disparagingly called squatters have lived for more than 1 or 2 generations on the pieces of land that they are on. Yet their occupancy of these lands is threatened because they have no formal title. This is what happened to the persons in Bull Bay, Mr. Speaker, living on the land 30 and 40 years. They have seen their children and grandchildren grow on these lands. They are now being told that they must leave to facilitate the building of the South Coast Highway. We're not against the South Coast Highway, but the people there in these communities should have their rights recognized. They are being evicted without any prospect of compensation. This is unjust. The good book proverb says, whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. When citizens have titles to land, they can step up in life. A title allows them to become potential borrowers in financial institutions and convert their humble stake into resources to start small businesses. When they make money, they can improve their own homes and provide for their families. We'll not only regularize the titles of the land, but we will join that land titling process with the National Housing Trust contributions. As I've said over and over again, everybody know who throw a partner in Jamaica. If you throw yarn, you must get a draw. So if you make a contribution, you should get a benefit. It might not always be a mortgage benefit to the fullness, but if you get your title to your land, you can get some, and you are a contributor, you can get resources that will enable you to build a house of your dreams within your capacity as part of the housing. And hear me now, when I talk about titling, we're not talking about 6,000 or 10,000 titles a year. That will take us a century to complete. The next PNP government is committed to issuing a minimum of 150,000 titles per year, which will be prepared using the most, not only on the basis of the legal legislative adjustments, but using the most up-to-date satellite-based global positioning technologies so that we can move at warp speed to provide titles for the people and correct the deficit in our district. The fourth pillar involves unlocking the creativity and resilience of the small and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, I've already spoken about the real producers. Sometimes if you don't look for them, you won't notice them. You will overlook the person producing under the mango tree, the sidewalk garage operator, the welding shop in the front yard, the coders and the studio man with a backroom studio, the cook shop person, the young DJs with a music studio in Raytown. Most of our people are employed in these enterprises. It is true that the facilitation of these small enterprises, bringing them into the mainstream, that is how we're going to get the 5% growth. The general lowering of interest rates will help this sector. However, even more importantly, the banks will have to be induced to lend money to these small businesses and to engage the non-traditional sectors, such as our music and design industry and our young filmmakers. Most of our banks today are not willing to accept a musician's catalog, no matter how big your name is, as collateral to sponsor a world tour. Government can assist in ensuring against some of this risk. The next PNP administration will facilitate this through adjustments to regulations as well as through the provision of credit risk insurance for financial institutions. Such schemes will also incentivize banks to go into the very areas that we need to develop, like our inner cities. We will extend the efforts of the Jamaica Business Development Corporation and other agencies, and will enter into partnerships with private business advisory services to get more small and medium-sized enterprises to modernize and grow their operations. Democratizing the economy through small business will not yield all the benefits which we seek and will not be sufficient to help develop the new productive infrastructure. We have to also unlock the engines of innovation. We believe that the special enterprise zones legislation, special economic zone legislation, can assist in establishing Jamaica as a sophisticated, innovative, nimble, high-income, and internationally competitive. SEZ legislation, along with carefully designed and properly aligned tax incentives, will help firms in the SEZs move up the value chain. We'll also assist in establishing special high-value sectors such as biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, and biotechnologies. This is intended to pull Jamaica into the knowledge-driven economies. Our natural biodiversity in areas such as the cockpit country provides an ideal fit that could help Jamaica benefit from the establishment of high technology sectors. We'll promote collaboration between our universities and other government-financed research institutions like the Scientific Research Council, along with private firms, local or foreign, with a view to unlocking the impulse towards innovation. Call centers need to move up the value chain. They can become advisors for legal contract work. They can help facilitate design work. They can provide accounting services. And we move the whole country's productivity up the value chain.
That's right.
Software development must be a key element. While it might run counter to some of the prevailing orthodoxies, especially coming out of Washington, and given the greater flexibility that exists now, we can look more creatively at how we use our taxation arrangements to facilitate high technology operations coming forward. The tax systems can help provide a useful tool for rewarding firms that innovate, for example. It can help reward companies that provide in-house training to raise the productivity levels of their workforce. We can also facilitate knowledge transfer between bigger firms and smaller firms and facilitate differential tax rates to do some of that. We need to be more creative in that regard. The sixth pillar, and one that I really want to emphasize, will require a better deal for the workers of Jamaica. This better deal must be built upon the fundamental recognition that the worker and workers are an essential and indispensable part of the productive infrastructure of our country. We must recognize also the simple fact of our history, that it was the workers in their claim for greater social justice that launched Jamaica's journey to nationhood in 1938. Over many years, the trade union movement has won many rights: collective bargaining rights, minimum wage, maternity leave, dispute resolution arrangements have resulted from their efforts. Working conditions and the lives of many workers have improved because of this. Yet today, if truth be told, many workers are in danger of losing these hard-earned benefits that have been won over the years. Nothing highlights this more than the increasingly widespread practice of contract work, which has become commonplace in many of the leading sectors of the economy. Most people know about the use of contract work in private security industry, but this practice has spread to many other industries in areas like tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, port workers, to name a few. The reality is that for these employees, who are for all practical purposes full-time employees, working as part of a highly structured hierarchy in their firms, taking regular instruction from supervisors in the performance of their tasks, yet despite functioning as full-time workers in every other respect, they are being employed under the guise that they are independent contractors operating on their own, working on their own, and directing themselves. The problem really is not what you call them. The problem is that the guaranteed benefits provided to full-time workers are denied to them for the most part. They don't get overtime. They don't get benefits such as maternity leave, vacation leave, or sick leave. They don't have access to health insurance and pensions negotiated by unions. This loss of benefits to our workers should not be allowed to continue. We recognize that there are some real issues that have to be confronted in some of the sectors. Security guards, for example, and the security companies can only employ staff to the extent to which they have contracts to provide security to other institutions. There's great uncertainty about the reliability of their contracts. Now, at the same time, we have to be able to protect the workers and protect the industry. It's not impossible. In areas like construction, we have developed joint industry councils. We can explore that mechanism there. We also recognize that we have to adjust the way we organize the labor market generally, because the world has changed drastically since a lot of the legislation that we have now was put into law. It was in order to accommodate some of these changes why we established the Labor Market Reform Commission in 2015. Right. Last year in this debate, Prime Minister, we raised the matter. We were given the assurance that the Parliament would consider it. It hasn't happened. We need to make it happen now because we need to protect the workers' rights. That's right. But I want to say plainly that the next PNP government will also introduce specific legislation to protect the contract workers so that those who operate as full-time workers will be protected in terms of benefits. I also want to urge the government to give priority to the passage of the new Occupational Health and Safety Bill. It is part of the agreement with the Joint Confederation of Trade Unions. As part of that agreement, the law should have been passed in the 2018-19 financial year. We need to fulfill the obligations to the workers. A critical ingredient, the seventh pillar, is the public sector transformation and governance. The cost cutting that we have now, the administrative reform, public sector transformation has been around from the 1980s. It continued through the 90s, and more recently, it has been driven by the fund agreements. But those efforts have been driven mainly by the need to cut costs. I think the focus really ought to be on the facilitation of growth, not just through the cutting of costs. And quite frankly, I think that the anchor of 9% wages to GDP needs to be re-examined. There's no particular magic to a 9% number. It is true that it can be too high, and we can't allow it to run away, but there's no particular magic to 9 more than 8.5 or 9.5 for that matter. But a band needs to be found. When you force it down in a situation like we have, where 80% of our public sector workers are police and security services, health workers, nurses, doctors, lab technicians and the like, and teachers and educators, to say that we're going to cut the numbers or cut the wages is to propagate a mistaken notion that we have too many of these people or that they are overpaid. The truth is we are faced with a chicken and an egg dilemma. You need better teachers to raise your growth levels. Yes. But so you are faced with the chicken and the egg dilemma. We need to reconfigure. Yes. We need to reconfigure the proposals in this regard. The role of the state as we see it is to efficiently serve the citizens' needs through quality education, health and security. The key elements of public sector transformation that we want to focus on is the review of wages and salaries to make them more competitive. We can't have our best trained professionals leaving in droves as they are now doing. We want to ensure, secondly, the need for greater efficiency and decision making, especially as it affects the needs of citizens and corporate entities who want decisions from government. We have to get into the digital age. The third point, we need hospitals worldwide are digitizing. Whether you go to Lionel Town or you go to Cornwall Regional or you go to UWI or you go to Kingston Public, they should be able to pull up your X-ray records and your health records on the computer wherever you turn out to be. It will mean better health care. The same applies for schools and schools records, land titles and company records. And we have to have a whole new culture of service. We need to have speedier project approvals. We will set and maintain accountability in service standards. We can do it. Furthermore, public sector transformation will be only meaningful where standards of good governance are established and maintained. In recent times, cronyism, as evidenced in the appointments of unqualified friends in Petrojam and senior appointments in bauxite institutions, has caused us to lose our standing in the world community. This is evident in Jamaica's decline in the global corruption index. We have had to face a long and disgraceful list of scandals in the past few years. We can do better as a country in this regard. Environment and climate change is our 8th pillar. The critical point is this, and I think to begin with I want to pay tribute to former Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller, who established a ministry with specific responsibility for climate change. The next PNP administration will place a priority in the face of this climate change reality in strengthening our coastal defenses, particularly in low-lying communities like Port Maria, Port Royal, Portmore, Savlamar, and Lucia, among others, which are highly exposed to the risk of rising sea levels. We're going to invest heavily in recharging our watersheds through a massive reforestation program. We need to replace our use of fossil fuels with renewable energy resources. We need to ensure that we engage in greater research for key food crops. And finally, I really want to make a simple point. Let us agree, no mining in the cockpit country. Rather than risking the destruction of the cockpit country and its invaluable water and plant resources by facilitating old industries, let us instead see the cockpit country as a springboard in the development model of a new Jamaican economy. Agriculture and unlocking the agricultural potential of the country is our ninth pillar. Unless we raise the productivity levels and incomes in the agricultural sector, which is still the second largest single employer of labor, but which is caught in the trap of low-level, old, outmoded technologies, unless we transform it, the country is going to be poor. One of the successes of the previous PNP administration was that we were able to take approximately $300 million off Jamaica's food import bill, $300 million US. Yet now the food import bill is rising again. It's going to be over $1 billion US this year. This is not going in the right direction. Agricultural transformation is going to involve many things. First of all, titling, providing titles for land for. Secondly, we need land to be made available to producers, but we need it on a more transparent basis than exists now. What has happened? What has happened to the parish land committees that used to exist? When lands are available, make it public. Let us know who is going to get it and what they're going to do. Transparency, transparent availability to land. We have to protect and expand the provision of the necessary infrastructure, farm roads, irrigation, research capabilities. We need to focus our research not just on the export crops of sugar and bananas as we did in the past, but we want to see our soursop, naseberry, sweetsop, and sorrel find its way to the tables of the world. We have to incentivize our research institutions. And finally, we need to review and transform the overly cumbersome system of regulations and waivers that exists in the agricultural sector. Too much bandulism exists in it now. It never starts now, but too much. The people, it should be the grant of licenses to import things like chicken neck, chicken back, onion, red peas, and the like needs to be transparent. And it needs to be changed so that it becomes an incentive to producers. Now the people use them. The sector has long been held back by bandulism and cronyism. This continues to this day. And finally, And finally, we need to boost business and technology. We are committed to driving inclusive, significant growth to set the foundation for a new day, for a new Jamaica, so that all Jamaicans can live the good quality life. In so doing, we'll revisit the tax code so Jamaica is a place to do business, earn great salaries, and raise families. Incentivize innovation, support new businesses with more access to investors, liberalize fintech and blockchain technologies, and modernize e-commerce legislation to facilitate the easier movement of money, lower our energy bill, explode the data revolution by deeper partnerships with our telecoms providers, and guarantee internet access in every part of the country. Partner with the hospitality industry with incentive support to encourage reinvestment as we build our tourism in the post-coronavirus period and step up into a new day. Like many Jamaicans, Mr. Speaker, I often reflect on the words of our national anthem, a prayer to our eternal Father, asking for blessings on our beloved homeland, and for our leaders to be granted wisdom from above. Good leaders must have the ability to scan the horizons, identify risks, draw on collective experiences of our people, and determine solutions that benefit every single citizen and the nation as a whole. As we face the uncertainties and fear from the coronavirus, I know that with God's help, unity of purpose, and lessons learned from past experiences, Jamaica will survive. Mr. Speaker, history has taught us that we do better as a country when we find common cause, especially in times of crisis. We need all hands on deck, not just the political parties, but all stakeholders. We need to mobilize our citizens from every nook and cranny of Jamaica, from every group throughout the society. And importantly, we need to provide clear, concise, and usable information in a timely manner that informs the public on their roles and their responsibilities. This was the lesson of EPOC, the Economic Program Oversight Committee. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, as we confront the challenges of social transformation and the building of a new day for a new Jamaica, everyone from the executive, the parliamentary, the leaders across all sectors in the country, and all our people must be included. We believe in the politics of consultation and participation. We have to find a way to refuel that passion and dedication and patriotism that powered the determination of our forefathers and mothers. With that inheritance, if we utilize the resources of our country and the resourcefulness of our people, we can attain even greater success and greater wealth. We must create an economic and social structure that put people and people's interests at the center of our national concerns. That is why we're going to end the two-tiered educational system, Jamaica's blot of educational apartheid. That is why we are going to undertake the most massive land titling efforts ever seen in the history of this country. That is why we'll make it easier for Jamaicans to have their own house key and own their own home. That is why we're going to make it easier for Jamaicans to establish sustainable and successful businesses and enterprise. We're going to make it easier for students to finance and get access to tertiary education. We'll make it easier for graduates of our universities to repay their loans or to give work in exchange for the debts that they have. That is why we're going to protect workers and change the legislation to protect contract workers. That is why we're going to ensure that those who break the rules of governance pay with sanctions. We are ready to build a new Jamaica, a Jamaica that works for all. As the psalmist says, the Lord is our light and our salvation. Whom shall we fear? The Lord is the strength of our life. Of whom shall we be afraid? Let us remember the almighty power of God as the generations of our forefathers did. The God who leads us forth in beauty over this fair land. The God who is the ruler and guardian of our people. It would be a blessing in this time when we are all so concerned if this country was to declare a day of prayer at a time such as this. I propose to write to His Excellency the Governor General, hopefully with the support of the Prime Minister, to suggest that he declares such a day when all Jamaica can recall the God of our forefathers. Let us remember the prayer of our national anthem. Eternal Father, bless our land. Guard us with thy mighty hand. Keep us free from evil powers. Be our light through countless hours. May God keep everyone safe and bless Jamaica and earth.
Mr. Speaker, we want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for that very well thought out presentation on behalf of on behalf of I don't know why, but I get a sense that that speech was designed prior to the recent developments with the challenges that confront us at the moment. But his level, his sincerity in his utterances, we don't agree with all that he has said, but we find common currency with some of the more constructive aspects that accord with our own views. And we will look forward now to the presentation by the leader of the country, Prime Minister of Jamaica, on Thursday. And I, for one, am looking forward to that. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask this Honourable House to recommit announcements, because there are a couple of items that we overlooked in the interest of time and to facilitate the opposition in the presentation of the Leader of the Opposition. So I would ask that we recommit announcements at this time.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? As of it. Announcements.
All right.
Also laid on the table of the House today is a copy of the Jamaica Gazette Supplement, Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, dated Monday, March 16, 2020, enclosing the Disaster Risk Management Enforcement Measures Order 2020 under the Disaster Risk Management Act.
Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Reports from committees.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Joint Select Committee of Parliament appointed to consider and report on the bill shortly entitled the Data Protection Act 2017.
Notice of motion given orally.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the report of the Joint Select Committee of Parliament appointed to consider and report on the bill shortly entitled the Data Protection Act 2017, which was laid on the table of the House on the 17th day of March 2020, be approved.
Mr. Speaker, it's not intended to do any further business today.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, you would remember that the member from North Clarendon had gotten up earlier and asked for a suspension on the questions from the members to allow for the presentation of the leader of opposition. I am clear that there are a few members. Let me speak for myself. I certainly have a couple of questions I'd like to ask on the presentation made by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. And I was anticipating, based on the earlier discussion, being able to ask those questions at this time.
Is it the wish of the member to have questions responded to by the Prime Minister?
No, but to be clear, Mr. Speaker, if you allow me, to be clear, member from St. Andrews South West, I had responded to the member from Kingston Central on his point regarding the loss of income, but he also asked questions about testing. And as I had said before, when it comes to answering those questions, I would defer and indeed ask permission of the Speaker to allow the Minister to respond. The Minister is not in the House now. In fact, he is having a press conference at this time, and I really would not want to give a response in his absence. So if you could excuse that for today, member.
I'm sorry, that was in relation to that particular question. But subsequent to that, the member from North Clarendon got up and asked individuals to hold whatever questions they had until after the presentation. I would not presume to determine whether you are in a position to answer the questions that others have. Maybe you could hear those questions as issues that are really burning from us, and then determine whether you're in a position to answer those or not.
Member, as long as the Speaker acknowledges that it was a suspension of the question on the matter of a statement, it would be your right to ask the questions. I will try to answer as best as I can.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in that light, I ask that the time being 5:43, beyond the time when questions and answers to questions are taken, that the Parliament facilitates the question and answer by recommitting and voting on question and answers to questions.
Those in favour? Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, In relation to the statement made by the Prime Minister, there are three quick questions that I really wanted to ask. One is that we have been talking a lot about the how we compensate in the businesses that are formal businesses. I'm concerned about some of the individuals working in the communities in Southwest St. Andrew who are not necessarily part of the formal business arrangement, and whether or not there is some thinking about what kind of stimulus or what we could do in terms of helping them. I'm thinking of the bar around the corner, thinking of the soup man. I mean, there are so many businesses that are being affected. And I believe that as government, I would want, if you have not fully discussed that yet, if you are not there yet, I certainly want to recommend that that is something that needs to be taken on the table for you to kind of look at how they can be compensated. That's one. That's one. The literature seems to suggest that aggressive testing and rigorous contact tracing are important. I think some questions was asked earlier that if we get some details, we might be able to see that. But the bigger area where I really don't hear us talking too much about has to do with the mental health. There are a number of children that are at home now, spending far more time at home than previously. There are a number of parents that are going to have to deal with students at home during this time. There are a number of individuals who are also at risk. Some have already voluntarily self-isolated, and there are many people who are just simply spending more time at home as they avoid large crowds. We commonly say that 1 in 3 Jamaicans have some kind of mental health issue, and I'm just wondering, what are we suggesting? What is the message to individuals to help them cope? You know, when you read around, you'll hear persons making suggestions, even for parents and children, to even discuss it with their children, so that as some persons, to reduce the temptation to panic, and to help our children to even understand what is happening. I'm really concerned about the mental health. And then in keeping with that, I don't know if this has been contemplated, but maybe we could have a discussion with our telecoms providers about what rebate or how they can help. Now that individuals are going to be using more data, as you do distance teaching and learning, as you say to individuals that being in touch with family members is important even for their own mental health during this time. I believe that some kind of rebate, some kind of incentive could be given from our telecoms provider, and I want to place that as an idea to be contemplated.
Prime Minister.
Member, let me start with the concern you raised regarding the mental state. I'm using that term rather than mental health of the population, dealing with so many changes, so much information that is causing so much fear, and how that could plunge a nation into a pessimistic outlook on the future. And I believe that your question is in itself an answer, and I will have a word with the Minister of Health about the messaging that we are giving. The truth is that we have postured in such a way as to get the attention of the nation to the seriousness of the situation, and that can be overplayed, and we don't want to send out a total message of doom and gloom. At some point in time, we will have to change our message to say to the population, here is the new normal, and we are coming out of a crisis, and here is a positive outlook. At this phase of the crisis, it is important to get all players of a mindset of seriousness, and that is a posture. So to date. But I acknowledge that you, as a government, even the opposition, as a society, we can't maintain this state for too long. It can be depressing, both mentally, but also in terms of economic outlook, because there is a psychology of economics which we have to pay attention. So I'm agreeing with you, member, that the government has to pay attention to the messaging. The other issue you raised about compensatory income or some sort of support. I want to be very careful, member, with what I say, because the budget does not have a great deal of margin. And even though the Minister of Finance has put forward a $7 billion, that is just 10. That is just a contingency. It's not that, we'll be able to spend it. So we have to be very careful. Right now, the minister has outlined some things that he's thinking, some things that he will do. We will have further discussions on that. Bear in mind that many of these suggestions, we have to have consultations with stakeholders. So even what you're suggesting with the telcos, this is something that we will have to have a discussion with them. We are already in discussions. They are already arranging the provision of their service to ensure that we have increased bandwidth, that we have good uptime, and so forth. They are already making arrangements for us to be able to contact the numbers on the Ministry of Health's website, and those contact numbers, there will be no charge. We are working on a website now, and further on develop an app that will allow the Jamaican population that is affected to have immediate contact with the Ministry of Health through that website. So a lot of things being done, and telcos are helping us with that. So I think that they are playing a role, but what you have suggested, we will have a discussion with them.
Mr. Phillips, sorry.
Prime Minister, the school closure, we understand the preliminary 2-week announcement, but based on what we're seeing in other countries, and especially given the proximity to the Easter holiday anyway, when that 2 weeks would have expired, it is most likely that it's going to be a much longer closure than 2 weeks. I want to ask specifically about the nutritional support, both for the PATH beneficiaries. And the truth is, if you speak to the principals, what they'll tell you is that they actually subsidize lunches for students who are not even technically PATH beneficiaries, but they need the support. So this is a substantial block of students, hundreds of thousands of students. The logistics of trying to provide them nutritional support, given that they're not now coming to school regularly, is going to be very costly relative to the benefit. Prime Minister, would you consider, if we assume, for example, it's going to be a 6-week lockdown, just pay that as a cash payment to the PATH beneficiaries, at least upfront it, so that they will have that, and the cost of distributing the benefit relative to the benefit will be very low, much more so than if we try to continue actually distributing food. And that I want to make that suggestion to you.
Before I answer your question, member from Central Manchester, very surprising in that I was just doing my early morning routine of gathering information and came across a post where a school, I believe it is in the United Kingdom or the United States, that they have the same issue, that there are students who get their support from schools. They get their lunch, and so many right across the world. And what the principals were saying is that they are in the school, their canteen is open, preparing the lunches, and what they do is that the kids come to the school and pick up their lunch and go. So in other words, it is not just a situation that Jamaica is facing. It is expensive, but our principals are doing that now. Some of our principals are doing that. They are preparing, students are coming to schools, and they are collecting. For some, it would not be logistically possible because of the distance of travel. So the truth is that children who are on path, their parents would also be supported via check on path. And therefore, the suggestion makes eminent sense, and I'm certain that the ministry was already contemplating it. If not, it is a welcome suggestion that the path payment to schools, in cases where it is verified that they can't serve the children, that those children be given the funds up front on the path check that would go to the family. That is the essence of your and that is something we will, as far as possible. Now, just a point, again, we are very careful not to just shut down the economy. So I'm just saying the closure of the schools. So we're coming up on the 10 days. It is, as you say, very likely, because you'll be so close to the Easter holiday, that we go through the Easter holiday. We will do an assessment just at the end of the Easter holiday. And that assessment is always what is happening to the numbers in quarantine, the numbers that are confirmed, and other assessments that the health department will make. In other words, we can't keep doing this forever. That is something that the Parliament and the country has to understand. We can't keep doing it forever. We are doing it to limit the spread.
Let me just finish. Member, a serious consideration that I'm sure you're concerned about is the question of the payments to the parents. And on April the 3rd, all parents of children on path will be paid. That's number one. Number two, as far as the delivery of these facilities are concerned, Optum and the Red Cross have come together to assist us in that regard. So the delivery is not as much of a problem as it was initially when it started. And thirdly, there are certain companies, I'm not going to call their names here because, well, everything is everything. But I'm sure you'll understand what I mean when I say that there's a major company that has quite kindly stepped in and have undertaken to provide meals to supplement what we are providing for the children. So as far as the meals and the provision of food for the parents are concerned, that's under control. As far as the payments, other payments for the parents are concerned, that too is under control. And I must add, and with some degree of great satisfaction and pride in those who work in the Ministry of Health, that the children are actively involved in school work in the Ministry of Education. All the children are exposed, with the exception of areas where we are a bit challenged, and what we have to address are those parents and children who don't have the funds to access the phone facilities that is the only source of contact. But we will overcome that in a matter of days when we provide internet connections to them, or I should say electronic communications to them, for them to be exposed to their lessons. Kids are happy, and in fact it opens up a new vista of opportunity for us to look at how we structure our educational program, because they are being taught now in a very structured and concentrated way, devoid of any distractions in the classrooms or any deficiencies that might exist in the physical structure within the classrooms. So we're very hopeful that this method that we have adopted will redound to the benefit of the children.
Thank you. Just one follow-up question, Minister. If there is a silver lining in this for the education system, is that it might accelerate the integration of technology into the teaching and learning process. We've been talking about it for a while, but it has really been quite slow in coming. would you be willing, these tablets in schools that we've bungled for years, getting the tablets to the students, the tablets to the teachers, which we've bungled for years, even though it was part of the negotiations 3 years ago. It was agreed to give them. Rather than trying to procure these things centrally, which have been subject to bungling over and over again, can't we just give it to the schools as a technology facilitation grant and let them give the teachers to procure their own technology and the students to help the students, or the school on behalf of the students, rather than this massive centralization, which has not worked? So why don't we just use this opportunity, to the extent there is a silver lining, to really accelerate the integration of technology into the teaching and learning process, and empower the schools now when the imperative is upon them, by doing a budget transfer, whether it was coming from e-learning or universal service fund, or wherever the funding was coming from, and abandon this centralized procurement that has stopped and started and cancelled and over again.
Member, prior to this crisis that now confronts us, we had taken a decision to decentralize most of our operations in the ministry. It revolves around 6 regional areas headed by a director, who we are in touch every week by a video conferencing. So we are in touch literally with every single area of education in the country by video conferencing. That was initiated by me only recently. Last week alone, we had 3 such video conferences. So we are closer to the situation on the ground now. And we had taken a decision prior to that for the management of the schools in these regions to be given funds to take care of maintenance and other expenses that would normally have to come to the ministry for approval. That will now, those funds will be delivered directly to the regional director's office, and they will handle it at each school. So the technology part now comes into play. I was mentioning to you, I had a meeting with a significant player in the field to look at the question of communicating and transferring data and information to each of the regions. So we are getting involved in a very scientific way with the whole management of our schools in all reaches of the country.
Sorry, let me help you, member.
The mic on, please.
As it relates to the tablets in schools and the tablets or computers for teachers, Cabinet approved the contract for the purchase of for the tablets for teachers just last week, and the tablets for schools as well, formally last week. But your substantial point I take, and in a sense we are being forced into that because of what is happening with resources into the Universal Service Fund, the UAF. That is declining. So it really should be, from a policy perspective, that we give a technology grant to students and let them go and find the best technology in the market. There are challenges with that, obviously, because you will have different grades and different specifications and all of those issues. But I agree with the principle that in today's day and age, when you have so many options in technology, that it might be a cheaper and more effective way to provide a technology grant. So I'm agreeing with you from that perspective.
Prime Minister, just the issue of water, because in some parishes it's a crisis now. In Manchester, we have not seen regular water in the pipes for about 5 weeks now because of issues with the NWC. And the current situation now where many contractors, private contractors, because NWC has no rapid response as it is now, many of the municipal councils don't have trucks, so they have to depend on private contractors. And the current setup now where these contractors have to wait months to get paid by the Ministry of Water, now a lot of them do not want to deliver water. So since we are in this period of emergency, can the government itself look on emergency procurement of water in the sense of sending monies to the local municipal councils and have them manage the delivery of water? Because in my own case, I only have 20% of my constituency that actually has running water. The rest of it don't. And it is an issue right now, not only in Manchester, but I imagine right across the island.
In the specific case of Manchester, as the NWC would have explained, that the pump, which is a specialized pump, because it pumps from way down 300 feet underground, so it's a specialized pump, not a pump that you could have with backup and that kind of thing. So that pump went down, and the parts are being imported. The parts should be here, should be here this week. I don't have an update as to whether or not the parts have arrived, but we were budgeting for them to be here this week, and then it will take a few days to have it installed. I will get an update and pass on to you as to whether or not they actually got the parts. Outside of that, we have looked at the process of the government paying for private contractors to deliver water. And as you have said, the long delays in payments is a real deterrent for private contractors to offer their trucks to the government. We have since taken that payment from the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and we have passed that over to local government. So local government is going to handle that using a different methodology. Minister Mackenzie has been tasked with developing the framework for that to happen. So I'm expecting that it will be a much more seamless and expeditious process. And that is being worked on now. By the time I come to present on Thursday, I should have a far more detailed presentation on the national water trucking exercise that will have to take place.
Thank you. Prime Minister, sometimes in our history there's a reset button that we press. And I think this virus has allowed us the opportunity to look at how we modify our behaviors, especially in terms of sanitation and other things that we perhaps should have been doing better. In the last year, because of dengue, the Ministry of Health in periods has allocated resources to constituencies. And I think you have a pretty good matrix as to perhaps how much those kinds of interventions may have cost. May I suggest to you, sir, that in the perhaps $7 billion that you're going to be allocating, that you prorate each constituency with the Constituency Development Fund to allocate the resources urgently to the CDF, to each constituency, perhaps at $5 million, for benefits for new sinks in the markets or in public spaces, for other skips, etc., and for other mechanisms that can continue the modifications that Jamaicans have already started. Jamaicans have adopted washing of hands and a whole new range of practices that we would not want to see us go back in another direction. So may I suggest to you that perhaps you look at allocating additional resources from the $7 billion to our CDF urgently during this period. Maybe it is a one-off. Maybe it can be something that is put in place for going forward in times of disasters. That's all I'm saying.
No, thank you for this suggestion, member. As we have been discussing, the economic fallout from this crisis around the world and in Jamaica is likely to be sharp and severe. And the resources that we have managed to put together, only because of an acceleration in debt repayment, we have to ensure that the persons who are most affected by this crisis are the ones who benefit. And we want to steer the resources as well in a direction that can allow for the fastest possible recovery. So we want to make sure productive capacity is maintained and that the portfolios of employees, even if they're lying low, don't go too far. They can be called back in and get up to speed as soon as available. We also have to make sure, remember, that a historic intervention of this nature, that we have objective criteria that are applied equally across the board with transparent and accountable mechanisms. If we're able to do that, the Jamaican people, the next time there is a problem like this, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we will have the government of the day will have the consent of the people to again respond in this way. As a result of that, I'm not convinced that doing it through the political system by MPs is necessarily something to consider, but may not be the way to. What we're thinking of is something that involves stakeholders from society, including persons from the opposition and so on, in terms of an objective assessment of need and processing. But we're open to your idea.
I sense your reticence and your hesitation, and perhaps it is because of how persons have perennially looked at all of us in this House as members of Parliament and the CDF perhaps as a welfare fund that often is not used in the best interest of people. Every one of us, and it is a perception, every one of us in this House, Minister, that 20 million is under pressure. And all I'm saying to you is stakeholders who are out there, and what has been happening to those of us in here, especially the agencies, is that when we don't have access to government resources, but when the stakeholders take unilateral decisions on behalf of the people that we represent without understanding the character of the communities that they live in, it puts us in an invidious position because directives are given and then you are not able to action them in the best interest of people. If you were to say, add it to the CDF with a specific objective of doing this in a corona crisis, the opposition already sits on the Disaster Management Council. Go ahead.
Remember, I think the Minister of Finance is thinking, when you say add to the CDF, he's thinking in large numbers. What I think you are saying, which I have sympathy with, is that as a part of the government's response, you know what I've discovered being in Parliament, not as long as the leader of the opposition, 23 years and you're almost 30. The truth is that the MPs are most times your most effective response. There's no question. Given I have been through, roadblocks, country shutdown, hurricanes, and other forms of disasters, and it is the MP, right? As much as we disparage the MPs, it is the MPs. It is in a sense In a sense, it shouldn't have been, but our system has evolved to be. Right? That's the reality. And at some point in time, we have to truly define what our role is. But as of now, we do have that immediate response role, which is why the CDF evolved from the LDP, from the SCSP, now to the CDF, which is a robust fund with structures and management. And as I've said, we have improved the structures and management. And it is a fund that I am ensuring that the public participates in the decision making of the youth, because now all MPs must have their consultations, and I know that is precisely. So what I believe you are saying is that an allocation should be made. Now, so let me look into it and make sure that there is an amount. But so you're taking over my speech now. So I don't want you to take away my speech, right? So we'll make some, but it won't be any massive allocation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, I thank you very much, because I put up my hand in full support of what the member from Northwest St. Anne said, and Southeast St. Anne said, and I thank you very, very much, Prime Minister, because you are really standing up and defending not the MPs, but the people of Jamaica, because we are the people who have to respond to the needs of our constituents in each parish. And I'm telling you, there is nothing that you do that will alleviate the fact that there is distress, and when there is distress, if it's 6 o'clock in the morning, they call you, and if it is 12 o'clock at night. And indeed, what the member is saying is that we know the needs of our people. They come to us, and if you can't help it, the reality is you don't serve any purpose there. Because in a distress, the policies that we make here do not, in fact, reach to them and answer the problems that they have on a daily basis. So, Prime Minister, I thank you very much, and I will say no more. I'm in full support, and I ask that you look at it, because these are serious times. The people are in dire need. Everybody is in need. Everybody is looking for some assistance. And yes, there must be transparency, but there is a limit to what we as parliamentarians can find for ourselves to alleviate the problem. So I thank you very much.
Mr. Samuda.
Mr. Speaker, it's not proposed to do any further business today, so I invite you to adjourn this honorable house until
Let's have some order, please.
The 19th, that is on Thursday, where we will have a presentation by the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Most Honorable Andrew Williams. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The motion is that we now adjourn until Thursday, the 19th at 2 o'clock. Those in favor? Those against? As of it, this honorable house now stands adjourned.
Reduce your risk of viral illnesses like the flu and coronavirus. Wash your hands frequently with soap